Don't worry, David. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm simply taking back what's mine. She said that calmly as she placed the resignation letter on his polished desk. For 5 years, Keisha Washington was the silent scientific genius behind Aura Organics, pouring her soul into a revolutionary anti-aging line derived from her family's ancestral secret. The position of Chief Innovation Officer was promised to her, but then they gave it to Chloe, a marketing director who was only good at taking credit for other people's work. They thought she would quietly accept being pushed aside. They thought they owned her formula. They were wrong. That resignation letter wasn't a goodbye. It was a trigger, activating a surprise cleverly planted in her contract years ago. A surprise that could render their multi-million-dollar star product completely worthless. So pour yourself a cup of tea, find a quiet corner, and listen to her story. And if it resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give it a like, and share your own story in the comments below. The air inside Aura Organics' lab greenhouse hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids, a sanctuary of glass and steel nestled in the heart of California's sun-drenched coast. Keisha Washington moved with quiet precision among the rows of moon-petal orchids, their delicate white blooms glowing faintly under the soft hum of grow lights. Each petal, veined with whispers of silver, seemed to pulse with secrets only she understood. Her fingers, steady and practiced, adjusted a drip line, coaxing life into the rare plants that formed the soul of the Genesis line, Aura's revolutionary anti-aging product, poised to redefine the cosmetics industry. Keisha's lab coat, crisp despite the humid air, brushed against a leaf, and she paused to check the soil's moisture with a practiced eye. This was her domain, where science and instinct intertwined, where years of tireless research had culminated in a formula that promised to erase time from weary skin. The greenhouse door hissed open, slicing through the stillness. Keisha glanced up, her focus unbroken, as David Lawson strode in, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. The CEO of Aura Organics carried an energy that seemed to clash with the greenhouse's calm, a restless ambition that radiated from his tailored suit and the sharp glint in his eyes. He stopped a few feet away, hands on his hips, surveying the rows of orchids as if they were soldiers awaiting his command. "Keisha," he said, his voice bright with a salesman's charm, "this place feels like a cathedral, and you're the high priestess." Keisha allowed a small smile, setting down her clipboard. "Just a scientist, David. The orchids do most of the work." She gestured to a nearby bloom, its petals catching the light like a fragile promise. The moon petal orchid, sourced from a remote Louisiana swamp, was her discovery, her legacy, though she never spoke of it that way. Its extract, painstakingly refined over years, was the cornerstone of the Genesis line, a breakthrough that had stunned even the most jaded dermatologists in clinical trials. David stepped closer, his gaze fixed on a data tablet in his hand. He scrolled through the latest results, his brows lifting as numbers danced across the screen. 92% reduction in visible wrinkles in 8 weeks, he read aloud, almost to himself. Faster than anything on the market. Keisha, this isn't just science. It's alchemy. He looked up, his smile widening, and placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that felt both familiar and calculated. "You're a genius. You know that, right?" She met his eyes, searching for sincerity beneath the polish. David had a knack for making promises feel like gospel, but she'd learned to trust results over words. Still, his enthusiasm was infectious, and she couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. "It's been a long road," she said, her voice steady but warm. "The team's worked hard to get here." "No, no, this is you," David insisted, his hand lingering a moment before dropping. "The Genesis line is your baby, and when we launch next month, the world's going to know it." He paced a few steps, his energy barely contained, as if the greenhouse walls were too small for his vision. "I'm talking global. Billboards in Tokyo, ads in Paris. Aura Organics is about to become a household name, and you're the one who made it happen." Keisha's fingers tightened around her clipboard, her mind racing. She'd spent 5 years at Aura pouring herself into this project, late nights analyzing chemical compounds, early mornings calibrating equipment, weekends coaxing fragile orchids to thrive in a foreign climate. The Genesis line wasn't just a product, It was her proof, her mark on a world that often overlooked her kind of brilliance. She nodded, allowing herself to imagine the view from the top. A corner office, a title that matched her contributions. David stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Keisha, I mean it. The Chief Innovation Officer role is yours after this launch. You've earned it. Start preparing. Big things are coming. His words landed like a spark, igniting something deep within her. Chief Innovation Officer. The title carried weight, a validation of every sacrifice, every moment she'd chosen work over rest, science over doubt. She exhaled, a quiet release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm, though her heart thrummed with possibility. David grinned, the kind of grin that sealed deals and broke barriers, and clapped his hands together. That's what I like to hear. Keep those orchids happy, and we'll be unstoppable. As he strode out, the door hissing shut behind him, Keisha turned back to her work. The greenhouse felt alive, the orchids whispering their secrets in the hum of the grow lights. She adjusted another drip line, her movements precise but lighter now, buoyed by David's promise. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream, not just of success, but of recognition. The Chief Innovation Officer role wasn't just a job. It was a platform, a chance to shape Aura's future, to prove that her ideas could lead as powerfully as they created. Outside, the California sun dipped low, casting golden streaks through the glass walls. Keisha glanced at the orchids, their petals shimmering like tiny moons. She thought of the launch, the press, the world waiting to see what she'd built. David's words echoed in her mind. Genius yours, unstoppable. She believed him, not because she trusted his charm, but because she trusted her work. The Genesis line was her creation, and no one could take that away. Yet as she returned to her notes, a faint unease stirred, unbidden. David's promises were bold, but promises were fragile things, easily bent by ambition or oversight. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the data before her. The numbers didn't lie. 92%, unmatched, revolutionary. This was her moment, and she would seize it. The greenhouse hummed, a quiet symphony of growth and possibility. Keisha's pen moved across her clipboard, charting the next steps, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the glass walls. A storm of ambition, betrayal, and a surprise she'd yet to unveil. The promise of the Chief Innovation Officer role still lingered in Keisha Washington's mind, like the faint scent of moon petal orchids, fueling her focus as Aura Organics buzzed with preparations for the Genesis line launch. The lab greenhouse, once her quiet sanctuary, now hummed with new energy. Marketing teams, PR consultants, and executives streamed through, their voices a constant murmur against the soft drip of irrigation lines. Keisha moved through her tasks with precision, calibrating equipment and reviewing trial data, but the air felt charged, as if the world beyond the glass walls was closing in. Chloe Sterling swept into the greenhouse one morning, her heels clicking sharply against the tiles, a tablet clutched in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. The marketing director's presence was a jolt, like a spotlight cutting through Keisha's carefully controlled environment. Keisha, darling, we need to talk story, Chloe said, her voice bright and commanding, as if the greenhouse were a stage and she its star. She perched on the edge of a workbench, oblivious to the delicate orchid seedlings nearby. The Genesis line is huge, but it's the story that'll sell it. So tell me, what's the inspiration behind this miracle flower of yours? Keisha paused, setting down a vial of orchid extract. She'd grown used to questions from the marketing team, but Chloe's tone, eager yet dismissive, as if the science were a mere prop, grated on her. The moon petal orchid, Keisha began, choosing her words carefully, comes from a specific ecosystem in Louisiana. Its properties are unique because of the soil and climate there. I spent years isolating the compounds that make it effective for anti-aging. She gestured to a nearby bloom, its silver-veined petals catching the light. Chloe's eyes flicked to the orchid, then back to her tablet, where she tapped notes with a manicured finger. Fascinating, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But what's the vibe? The heart of it? People don't buy compounds. They buy dreams. She leaned forward, her smile practiced. Give me something I can work with. Something emotional. Keisha's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice even. It's about transformation, she said. The orchid's resilience, thriving in a harsh environment, mirrors what the Genesis line does for skin, restoring vitality against time. She thought of her late-night experiments, the countless iterations that led to the formula's breakthrough. That was the heart of it, though she doubted Chloe would grasp it. Perfect, Chloe exclaimed, typing furiously. Resilience, vitality, nature's secret. Love it. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and flashed a grin. You're a gem, Keisha. Keep doing your thing, and I'll make sure the world falls in love with it. She was gone before Keisha could respond, leaving a trace of floral perfume that clashed with the greenhouse's earthy scent. Days later, Keisha sat in a conference room, surrounded by Aura's leadership team. The air buzzed with anticipation as Chloe took the floor, her slides bursting with vibrant images of dewy skin and blooming orchids. The Genesis line isn't just a product, Chloe declared, her voice carrying the cadence of a seasoned storyteller. It's a celebration of nature's secrets, a journey of resilience and vitality. Keisha froze, her own words echoing back at her, repackaged in Chloe's glossy presentation. The room erupted in applause, and David Lawson, seated at the head of the table, nodded approvingly. This is why you're the best, Chloe, he said. You've captured the soul of this campaign. Keisha's fingers curled around her pen, her chest tightening. She glanced at Chloe, who met her gaze for a fleeting moment, her smile unwavering but sharp, like a blade cloaked in silk. The meeting moved on, but Keisha's thoughts churned. Her words, her vision, had been lifted without credit, dressed up in marketing jargon, and sold as Chloe's brilliance. She forced herself to focus, jotting notes, but the sting lingered. The next morning, Keisha opened a magazine on her desk, its cover featuring Chloe beside a bottle of Genesis line serum. The headline read, The Marketing Genius Behind Aura Organics Skincare Revolution. The article gushed about Chloe's visionary storytelling, quoting her verbatim use of nature's secrets and resilience. Keisha's name appeared once, buried in a paragraph about the science team. She closed the magazine, her jaw set, and returned to her lab where the orchids waited, silent and steadfast. In the days that followed, Chloe's presence grew inescapable. She flitted through the office, pitching taglines and brainstorming ad campaigns, each one leaning heavily on Keisha's concepts. At a press briefing, Chloe stood before reporters, spinning a tale of discovering the magic of the moon-petal orchid, her voice dripping with conviction. David watched from the sidelines, his grin wide, oblivious to the theft unfolding before him. Keisha, standing at the back, felt a knot form in her stomach. She'd trusted David's promise, believed her work would speak for itself. But now, watching Chloe bask in stolen glory, doubt crept in like a shadow. Back in the greenhouse, Keisha adjusted a grow light, her movements mechanical. The orchids glowed under her care, their beauty a reminder of what she'd built. But Chloe's words, her stolen words, echoed in her mind, mingling with David's promise of the Chief Innovation Officer role. She wanted to believe it was still hers, that her work would outweigh Chloe's flair. Yet the magazine cover, the applause, the press briefing, they all pointed to a different story, one where her contributions were fading into the background. As she locked the greenhouse for the night, the glass walls reflected her silhouette against the darkening sky. The launch was weeks away, and with it, the moment David had promised would be hers. But the air felt heavier now, charged with an unspoken tension. Keisha's hand lingered on the door, her resolve hardening. She'd built the Genesis line from nothing. No one, not Chloe, not even David, could rewrite that truth, or so she hoped. The shadow of Chloe Sterling's theft clung to Keisha Washington like a faint, bitter aftertaste as she stepped into Aura Organics' sleek auditorium, the air buzzing with anticipation. The company-wide meeting was no ordinary gathering. Whispers of a major announcement had electrified the office for days, and Keisha felt the weight of David Lawson's promise, Chief Innovation Officer, settle over her like a mantle. She adjusted her blazer, her steps steady as she claimed a front-row seat, her clipboard resting on her lap like a shield. The Genesis line's launch was weeks away, and her work, the moon petal orchid's quiet alchemy, was about to take center stage. She allowed herself a moment of pride, imagining her name called, her years of sacrifice finally recognized. The auditorium filled quickly, employees murmuring about the future of Aura Organics, their voices a low hum against the hum of overhead lights. Keisha caught snippets of conversation. Praise for the Genesis line, speculation about promotions. She kept her gaze forward, ignoring the chatter, her mind fixed on David's words in the greenhouse. You're a genius. The role is yours. She believed in the data, 92% wrinkle reduction, unmatched in the industry. That truth was hers no matter how Chloe had spun it in meetings or magazines. David strode onto the stage, his presence commanding as he adjusted the microphone with a practiced smile. The room hushed, all eyes on him. Today, he began, his voice resonant, we celebrate a milestone. The Genesis line isn't just a product, it's a revolution. It's proof that Aura Organics doesn't follow trends. We set them. Applause rippled through the crowd and Keisha's lips curved slightly, her heart quickening. She knew the numbers, the late nights, the precise calibration of orchid extracts that made this moment possible. This was her work, her legacy. David paced the stage, his gestures expansive. This launch demands visionary leadership, someone who can carry Aura into the future, who embodies the soul of the Genesis line. Keisha straightened, her fingers tightening around her clipboard. The air felt charged, as if the room itself held its breath. She could picture it, stepping onto the stage, her voice steady as she outlined her plans for innovation, her colleagues' applause a validation of her unseen hours. And that's why, David continued, his smile widening, I'm thrilled to announce our new Chief Innovation Officer. He paused for effect, scanning the room, and Keisha felt her pulse race, ready to rise. Chloe Sterling. The name hit like a physical blow, a sharp crack in the foundation of Keisha's expectations. The room erupted in applause, but it sounded distant, muffled, as if underwater. Chloe stood from a nearby seat, her smile radiant, her movements fluid as she glided toward the stage. She turned briefly, her eyes meeting Keisha's for a fleeting moment, a glance that held both pity and triumph, a silent claim to a victory Keisha hadn't realized was contested. Keisha's breath caught, her body frozen, her mind scrambling to process the betrayal. David clapped Chloe on the back as she joined him, her voice bright as she thanked the team, promising to elevate the Genesis line's vision to new heights. Her words were polished and rehearsed, but Keisha barely heard them. Her mind replayed David's promise in the greenhouse, his hand on her shoulder, his assurance that the role was hers. She'd trusted him, trusted the data, trusted her work to speak for itself. But now, watching Chloe bask in the spotlight, Keisha saw the truth. Her work had been repackaged, her voice silenced, her moments stolen. The applause faded into an awkward murmur as employees glanced at Keisha, some with sympathy, others with confusion. She forced her expression to remain neutral, her hands steady on her clipboard, though her knuckles whitened. Inside, a storm churned. Anger, hurt, disbelief, but she refused to let it show. Not here, not now. She'd spent years proving her worth, building the Genesis line from soil to serum, and she wouldn't unravel in front of a crowd. David wrapped up the announcement, his voice a blur of corporate platitudes about teamwork and bright futures. Chloe stepped down, shaking hands, her laughter cutting through the room like a blade. Keisha stood, her movements mechanical, and slipped out a side door, avoiding the curious stares. The hallway outside was quiet, the hum of the auditorium fading behind her. She leaned against the wall, her breath shallow, her mind racing. How had this happened? She'd seen Chloe's theft, her words in presentations, her face on magazine covers, but she'd believed David saw through it. His promise had felt solid, a contract forged in the greenhouse's sacred air. Yet he'd chosen Chloe, the storyteller, over the scientist who'd made the story possible. The betrayal stung deeper than she'd expected, not just for the lost promotion, but for the dismissal of everything she'd built. Keisha straightened, her jaw set. She wouldn't cry or rage, not yet. She thought of the orchids, their resilience, their quiet strength. She'd created something extraordinary, and no announcement could erase that. But the seed of doubt planted by Chloe's theft had taken root, and now it bloomed into a question. Could she trust Aura Organics to value her? David's broken promise loomed large, a crack in the foundation she'd thought was hers. As she walked back to the greenhouse, the glass walls glinting under the California sun, Keisha felt a shift within her. The role she dreamed of was gone, given to a slacker who'd spun her work into headlines. But she wasn't defeated. Not yet. Something stirred, a spark of resolve, a plan not yet formed, but waiting. She pushed open the greenhouse door, the familiar scent of earth and orchids grounding her. Whatever came next, she'd face it on her terms. The sting of Chloe Sterling's coronation as Chief Innovation Officer clung to Keisha Washington like a bruise as she stepped into her small apartment. The quiet hum of Aura Organics auditorium now a distant echo. The betrayal had left her hollow, David Lawson's broken promise replaying in her mind. The role is yours. She set her keys on the counter, the clink sharp in the stillness, and moved through the darkened space with deliberate calm. No tears, no outbursts. Keisha had learned long ago to channel hurt into focus, and tonight, that focus burned brighter than ever. She sank onto the couch, the weight of the day pressing against her chest. Chloe's triumphant glance, the applause, the way David had dismissed her contributions with a single announcement, it all churned in her mind, a storm she refused to let consume her. Instead, she rose and crossed to a small wooden box on her bookshelf, its surface worn from years of handling. Inside lay her original employment contract with Aura Organics, untouched since she'd signed it 5 years ago. Her fingers traced the edges, finding a page marked with a faded yellow highlighter, a clause she'd barely noticed at the time. Now it felt like a lifeline. Keisha spread the contract on her coffee table, the dim glow of a lamp casting shadows across the text. Article 3. B, highlighted in Marcus Thorne's meticulous hand, stared back at her. Any formula, process, or discovery derived from personal, pre-existing proprietary knowledge shall be considered co-owned intellectual property, with the employee retaining the right to withdraw commercial use at their discretion. Her breath caught. Marcus, the retired HR director who'd hired her, had insisted on adding this clause, his voice calm but firm. Protect your work, Keisha, always. She'd thought it a formality then, a precaution against an unlikely future. Now it was a weapon. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Marcus's number. It was late, nearly midnight, but hesitation wasn't an option. She dialed, and after 2 rings, his familiar, steady voice answered. Keisha, everything all right? The warmth in his tone grounded her, a reminder of the mentor who'd seen her potential when she was just a name on a resume. It happened, Marcus, she said, her voice low but resolute. Just as you warned, David gave the Chief Innovation Officer role to Chloe Sterling. The words tasted bitter, but saying them aloud sharpened her focus. She's been taking credit for the Genesis line, and he bought it. A pause, then Marcus's voice, calm but laced with steel. I figured they'd try something like this. You've read the contract. He didn't need to specify which part. Article 3B, Keisha confirmed, glancing at the highlighted page. It's still there, just like you said. Good, Marcus replied, a hint of pride in his tone. Are you ready, kid? This isn't just about walking away. It's about making them see what they've lost. Keisha's fingers tightened around the phone. She thought of the moon petal orchids, her years of work distilled into a formula that Chloe had spun into headlines, that David had handed to someone else. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced with the weight of what lay ahead. What's the next step? Marcus chuckled softly, the sound of a man who'd seen corporate games played and won. First, you act like nothing's changed. Go to work. Do your job. Let them think they've won. Meanwhile, you gather what you need, proof of your work, every email, every note. When the time's right, you'll know. He paused, his voice softening. You're not alone in this, Keisha. That clause is your shield, but you're the one who'll wield it. She nodded, though he couldn't see her. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. The call ended, and Keisha sat in the quiet, The contract still opened before her. The clause was more than words on a page. It was a reminder of her power, a safeguard Marcus had planted years ago, knowing a day like this might come. She thought of Chloe's smug smile, David's casual dismissal, and felt a spark ignite within her. Not anger, but purpose. Keisha stood, moving to her desk where a laptop glowed softly. She opened a folder labeled Genesis Line, a digital archive of her work. Lab notes, trial results, emails to David detailing her breakthroughs. Every file was a testament to her creation, a counterpoint to Chloe's stolen narrative. She began organizing them, her movements precise, her mind clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was hers. The clock ticked past midnight, but sleep was far from her thoughts. She thought of the greenhouse, the orchids waiting under the grow lights, their resilience a mirror to her own. David had promised her a title, a future, but he'd given it to someone who saw her work as a story to sell, not a science to understand. Chloe's theft had been subtle, cloaked in charm, but Keisha's response would be anything but. She closed her laptop and returned to the contract, rereading Article 3. The words felt alive, a promise of justice she hadn't known she'd need. Marcus's voice echoed in her mind. When the time's right, you'll know. She didn't have a plan yet, not fully, but the pieces were there. Her work, her rights, her resolve. The greenhouse had been her sanctuary, but it was also her arsenal, and she would use it. As she turned off the lamp, the room fell into darkness, save for the faint glow of streetlights through her window. Keisha felt a quiet certainty settle over her. David and Chloe thought they'd won, but they'd underestimated her. The Genesis line was her creation, and no one could take that away, not without a fight. She slipped the contract back into its box, her fingers lingering on the worn wood. Tomorrow she'd walk back into Aura Organics, her head high, her plan taking shape in the shadows. The midnight call with Marcus Thorne had ignited a spark in Keisha Washington, transforming the raw sting of betrayal into a quiet, burning resolve. As she stepped into Aura Organics' gleaming office the next morning, the weight of Chloe Sterling's stolen promotion and David Lawson's broken promise lingered. But Keisha wore her calm like armor. The greenhouse with its moon-petal orchids waited for her, a reminder of what she'd built and what she was prepared to protect. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Act like nothing's changed, and she moved through the day with deliberate precision, her every action a step toward a plan she was still shaping. The office buzzed with the afterglow of Chloe's announcement, employees exchanging excited whispers about the Genesis line's impending launch. Keisha kept her head down, calibrating equipment in the lab, her hands steady as she adjusted nutrient levels for the orchids. Chloe appeared mid-morning, tablet in hand, her voice bright with a confidence that grated against Keisha's restraint. "Keisha, quick question," Chloe said, leaning against a workbench, oblivious to the delicate seedlings nearby. "How do we explain the serum's glow effect to influencers? Something simple, for the vibe." Keisha suppressed a flicker of irritation, her tone even. "It's the orchid extract's interaction with skin proteins," she said, keeping it basic. "It enhances light reflection, gives a radiant look." She didn't mention the years of research behind it, the countless trials to perfect the formula. Chloe didn't need to know, and Keisha wasn't about to hand her more to claim. "Love that," Chloe said, typing rapidly. "Radiance is so on brand." She flashed a smile and left, leaving Keisha to her work. The interaction was brief, but it hardened Keisha's resolve. She wasn't just protecting her work. She was protecting herself from being erased. Throughout the week, Keisha played her part, answering Chloe's questions with minimal detail, guiding her through basic lab processes without revealing the core of the Genesis line's formula. She attended meetings, nodded at David's updates, and kept her expression neutral, even as Chloe's voice dominated discussions, spinning Keisha's science into marketing gold. Behind the scenes, Keisha was meticulous, saving every email, every lab note, every draft of her research into a secure folder. Marcus had been clear. Proof was her foundation, and she was building it brick by brick. By Friday, the office was a whirlwind of launch preparations. Mock-ups of Genesis line ads plastered the walls. and Chloe's laughter echoed through the halls as she charmed visiting investors. Keisha worked late, the greenhouse her refuge as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden streaks across the glass. She finalized a batch of orchid extract, her movements methodical, but her mind was elsewhere, crafting the moment she'd been preparing for since Marcus's call. At dusk, she printed a single sheet of paper, the words stark and deliberate. I am terminating my employment with Aura Organics, effective immediately. Wishing the company well. 2 sentences, no flourish, no explanation. It was enough. She folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, her heart steady despite the weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was a calculated step, the first move in a game David and Chloe didn't yet know they were playing. Keisha walked to David's office, the envelope light in her hand but heavy with intent. The door was ajar, and she found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by revenue projections and launch schedules. He looked up, his expression impatient, as if her presence were an interruption. Keisha, he said, leaning back, what's this about? I'm swamped. She stepped forward, placing the envelope on his desk. My resignation, she said, her voice calm, almost serene. David's brows furrowed, and he opened the envelope, scanning the 2 sentences with a dismissive glance. Come on, Keisha, he said, his tone softening into something falsely paternal. You're stressed, I get it. The launch is intense. Take a few days. Clear your head. We'll talk when you're back. He pushed the letter aside as if it were a minor inconvenience, his attention already drifting back to his spreadsheets. Keisha didn't waver. She met his gaze, her eyes steady, her voice unwavering. I don't think the regret will be mine, David. The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, a quiet promise of something he couldn't yet grasp. She turned and walked out, her steps measured, leaving him to his papers and his ignorance. The office was quiet now, the bustle of the day fading as employees trickled out. Keisha returned to the greenhouse one last time, locking the door behind her. The orchids glowed under the grow lights, their petals a silent testament to her work. She ran a hand along a row of plants, her touch gentle, as if saying goodbye. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Article 3. B. Marcus's safeguard waited in the wings, and with it, the proof she'd gathered. Every email, every note, every piece of the Genesis line she'd built from nothing. As she stepped into the cool evening air, the California sky a deep indigo, Keisha felt a clarity she hadn't known since the announcement. David thought he could dismiss her, that Chloe's charm could eclipse her work. They were wrong. The envelope was just the beginning, a quiet declaration that she was done playing their game. She'd built the Genesis line, and she'd decide its fate. The greenhouse stood behind her, a glass fortress of her creation, its secrets locked away. Keisha's resolve hardened as she walked to her car, the envelope's weight replaced by a growing certainty. Whatever came next, whether chaos or justice, she was ready. The orchids would wait, and so would her surprise. Keisha Washington's resignation letter, with its 2 stark sentences, had landed like a pebble in a still pond, its ripples only now beginning to spread. Monday morning dawned at Aura Organics with a frenetic energy, the office alive with the final sprint toward the Genesis line's launch. The greenhouse stood silent, its orchids untended for the first time in years, a quiet testament to Keisha's absence. In the production wing, however, chaos was brewing, and Keisha's calculated exit was about to ignite a storm no one saw coming. In the sterile conference room, David Lawson leaned over a laptop, his usual polish fraying at the edges as he barked orders at the production team. The launch was days away, and the final formula for the Genesis line, Keisha's formula, was needed to greenlight mass production. A technician, sweat beading on his brow, clicked through files on a shared server, his voice tight. It's here, sir. Genesis final, formula, chem. But he hesitated, his screen flashing a prompt that sent a chill through the room. Enter password. Hint. True origin of the moonpetal orchid. David's face darkened. What the hell does that mean? He snapped, shoving a hand through his hair. Open it, now. The technician tried a string of guesses, Louisiana, orchid, Genesis, Each met with a red error message. The file, the heart of a $50 million production line, was locked, its secrets sealed behind a wall no one could breach. Chloe Sterling hovered nearby, her tablet clutched like a lifeline, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. "Maybe it's a glitch," she offered, her voice thin. "Keisha must have set a password by mistake." She typed furiously, trying variations, swamp, petal, anti-aging, but the screen remained unyielding. David rounded on her, his patience gone. "You worked with her in the lab, Chloe. You must know something about this damn flower." Chloe's smile faltered, her eyes darting away. "It's, you know, a rare orchid. From somewhere in the south, I think." Her vagueness hung in the air, exposing the hollowness of her claims to the Genesis line story. David's jaw tightened, his frustration shifting from the screen to her. "Find out," he growled, storming to his office. In his office, David grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Keisha's number. The call went to voicemail, and his voice cracked with urgency. "Keisha, it's David. The formula file's locked. Unlock it now. This isn't a game." He paused, his tone softening, desperation creeping in. "Please, let's talk. I'll fix this, whatever it takes." He hung up, staring at the phone, but no reply came. Keisha, miles away, listened to the message in her apartment, her expression unreadable. She deleted it without a word, her focus on the laptop before her, where her archive of Genesis line documents, proof of her work, sat ready. Back at Aura, the IT team was called in, their lead specialist shaking his head after an hour of failed attempts. "It's a custom encryption," he said, his voice grim. "Without the password, forcing it will corrupt the data. It's designed that way." David slammed a fist on his desk, the sound echoing. "She did this on purpose," he muttered, the weight of Keisha's resignation sinking in. The production line, investors, the entire launch, everything was at a standstill, and the clock was ticking. Chloe, meanwhile, paced the hallway, her phone buzzing with messages from the marketing team about delayed ad campaigns. She tried to recall Keisha's explanations in the lab, but they were a blur of technical terms she'd never bothered to understand. Her role as Chief Innovation Officer, so recently won, felt like a crown too heavy to wear. She approached David's office, her voice tentative. "Maybe we can recreate the formula? We have the orchids, right?" David's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You think it's that simple? Keisha spent years on this. You think you can just whip it up in a week?" His words cut, and Chloe shrank back, her confidence unraveling. The room fell silent, the reality settling in. Without Keisha's formula, the Genesis line was a hollow promise. In her apartment, Keisha closed her laptop, her movements calm but purposeful. She'd anticipated this moment, the panic, the realization that her work wasn't just a product, but a legacy they couldn't replicate. The password, true origin of the moon petal orchid, wasn't meant to be cracked. It was a taunt, a reminder of their ignorance. She thought of Marcus Thorne's advice. Let them think they've won. She had, and now they were scrambling, exposed without her expertise. The office descended into chaos as the day wore on. Investors called, demanding updates. Production managers scrambled for workarounds, but none existed. David stared at the locked file on his screen, the hint mocking him. He tried calling Keisha again, his voicemail more frantic, but she didn't answer. She was done with their games, done with being overlooked. The greenhouse, her sanctuary, held the orchids that powered Aura's dreams, but the key to those dreams was hers alone. As night fell, Aura Organics' gleaming facade hid a growing panic. Keisha, in her quiet apartment, opened her contract once more, her eyes on Article 3B. The clause was her shield, but the locked file was her opening salvo. She hadn't planned the full scope of her next move, but the pieces were falling into place. David and Chloe thought they could erase her, but they'd learn soon enough. Her work wasn't theirs to claim. The storm she'd unleashed was just beginning, and its next wave was already on the horizon. The locked file and its cryptic password, true origin of the moon petal orchid, had plunged Aura Organics into a tailspin, the production wing frozen and David Lawson's frantic voicemails unanswered. Keisha Washington's absence was no longer a quiet exit, but a gaping void. her resignation rippling through the company like a shockwave. Tuesday morning dawned with a tense hush over the office, the usual buzz of launch preparations replaced by whispered panic and urgent meetings. The $50 million Genesis line production line stood idle, and the weight of Keisha's calculated move pressed harder with each passing hour. In the executive boardroom, David paced before a wall of screens, each displaying stalled production metrics and impatient investor emails. His tie was loosened, his composure fraying as he barked at the IT team for updates. "There's got to be a way to break the encryption," he insisted, his voice hoarse. The lead technician shook his head, repeating the same grim truth. Forcing the file would destroy the formula. Chloe Sterling sat at the table, her tablet dark, her usual flair subdued. She'd spent the morning dodging questions from the marketing team, her answers vague as she grappled with her inability to explain the science she'd claimed as her own. At 10:03 a.m., a notification pinged across David's laptop, followed by a chorus of alerts from the board members' devices. An email marked urgent landed in their inboxes, its sender a prestigious law firm with a subject line that stopped David cold. Notice of intellectual property withdrawal for Genesis line. He opened it, his eyes scanning the text, each word landing like a hammer. The room fell silent as the board members read along, their expressions shifting from confusion to dread. The email was precise, its language unyielding. It cited Article 3. B of Keisha Washington's employment contract, a clause buried in fine print. Any formula, process, or discovery derived from personal, pre-existing proprietary knowledge shall be considered co-owned intellectual property, with the employee retaining the right to withdraw commercial use at their discretion. The Genesis line, the email declared, was built on Keisha's proprietary knowledge of the moon petal orchid, a legacy predating her tenure at Aura. Effective immediately, she was revoking the company's right to use it commercially. Attached was a notarized affidavit from her family, detailing the orchid's history, its origins in a Louisiana swamp, its cultivation passed down through generations. The password hint, true origin, wasn't a key to unlock the file. It was a pointed reminder of their ignorance, a final jab at their hubris. David's hands trembled as he scrolled to the attachment. A scanned copy of Keisha's contract with Article 3B circled in red ink. "This can't be legal," he muttered, his voice barely audible. He looked to the board's legal counsel, a stern woman who adjusted her glasses and shook her head. "It's airtight," she said. "We'd need to challenge it in court, but the affidavit and contract are clear. She has the right to pull the formula." The room erupted in murmurs, board members exchanging glances, their confidence in David's leadership visibly cracking. Chloe, her face pale, tried to interject. "We can still launch, right? We have the orchids, the lab notes." Her voice faltered under the legal counsel's sharp gaze. "Without the formula's specifics, you have nothing," the counsel said. "The orchids are useless without her process, and she's protected it." Chloe sank back in her chair, her title of Chief Innovation Officer now a hollow badge, her inability to answer technical questions laid bare. David slammed his laptop shut, his voice rising. "She planned this. She locked the file and sent this to sabotage us." But even as he spoke, the truth settled in. Keisha hadn't sabotaged anything. She'd simply reclaimed what was hers. The board chair, a gray-haired man with a steely gaze, leaned forward. "David, how did you miss this clause? You pushed for Chloe's promotion, but you sidelined the one person who made this product possible. This is on you." Across town, Keisha sat in her apartment, her phone silent. The email sent hours earlier through the law firm Marcus Thorne had recommended. She'd spent the night finalizing the affidavit with her family, their voices steady over a late call as they recounted the orchid's history, a legacy of resilience she'd carried into her work. The email wasn't an act of vengeance. It was a declaration of ownership, a line drawn in the sand. She opened her laptop, checking the folder of Genesis line documents she'd compiled, proof of every step, every breakthrough, every moment she'd poured into the formula. Article 3, B was her shield, but these files were her sword, ready if Aura dared to fight back. Back at the office, the boardroom descended into chaos. Investors were pulling out, their calls flooding David's phone. The marketing team scrambled to delay the launch, But Chloe had no answers, her carefully crafted narrative unraveling without Keisha's science to back it. David stared at the affidavit, the words blurring as he realized the depth of his miscalculation. He'd seen Keisha as a worker bee, not a leader, and Chloe as the face of the future. Now that future was crumbling, and the locked file was only the beginning. Keisha closed her laptop, a quiet calm settling over her. The orchids in her mind's eye, those glowing petals in the greenhouse, were hers, always had been. The email, with its attached contract and affidavit, was the surprise she'd promised in her resignation's cryptic farewell. She hadn't destroyed Aura. She'd simply reminded them who held the key. As the sun climbed higher, casting light through her window, Keisha felt the weight of betrayal lift, replaced by a certainty that her next move would define her future, not theirs. The email citing Article 3. B had landed like a guillotine, severing Aura Organics' dreams of a triumphant Genesis line launch. Keisha Washington's calculated withdrawal of her intellectual property had left the company reeling, its production line stalled, and its leadership exposed. By Wednesday, the fallout was undeniable. The sleek offices, once alive with anticipation, now hummed with a grim urgency. David Lawson's office was a fortress of closed doors and tense phone calls, while Chloe Sterling's polished facade crumbled under the weight of questions she couldn't answer. Keisha, miles away, had set the stage for her final act, not revenge, but reclamation. In the boardroom, the air was thick with recrimination. David faced a firing squad of board members, their faces etched with fury as stock prices flickered red on a screen. A rival company, sensing blood in the water, had rushed out a knockoff serum, touting it as a breakthrough in anti-aging. The market saw through the ploy. Their product, lacking the moon petal orchid's unique properties, flopped in early reviews, dragging Aura's reputation down with it. "You ignored the scientist who built this," the board chair snapped, his voice cutting through David's excuses. "You promoted a marketer who can't even explain the formula. Fix this or you're out." Chloe, summoned to explain the Genesis line's technical details, faltered under scrutiny. Her tablet, usually a prop for her charisma, lay useless as she stumbled over basic questions about the orchid's compounds. "It's a natural extract," she said, her voice thin, "that enhances skin vitality." The board's legal counsel raised an eyebrow. "And the process? The specific interactions?" Chloe's silence was deafening, her title of Chief Innovation Officer now a cruel irony. She left the room, her steps unsteady, her role reduced to a hollow shell. David, desperate, tried to salvage the situation. He proposed reverse engineering the formula, but the lab team shook their heads. Keisha's process was too intricate, her notes deliberately vague without the encrypted file. He sent another email to Keisha, his tone a mix of pleading and veiled threats. "We can negotiate. Name your price. Don't let this destroy what we built together." Keisha read it in her apartment, her expression calm, and archived it without reply. Aura wasn't her fight anymore. Months later, the California sun bathed a small, modern building in soft light, its glass walls mirroring the greenhouse Keisha had once called home. Washington Heritage Lab stood as her new beginning, a lab, greenhouse, and educational center rolled into one, funded by a women-led business grant she'd secured with her meticulously compiled Genesis line documentation. Inside, Keisha moved among rows of moon-petal orchids, their silver-veined petals thriving under her care. The space was hers, built on her terms, a sanctuary where science and legacy intertwined. She taught local students about botanical chemistry, sharing the knowledge that had shaped her, ensuring it would endure. A board member from Aura, a woman with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, reached out one afternoon, her email diplomatic but urgent. "We'd like to invest in Washington Heritage Labs," it read. "A partnership could benefit us all." Keisha read the offer, her lips curving into a faint smile. She pictured David's frantic voicemails, Chloe's faltering answers, the board's scramble to save face. The offer was tempting, millions to scale her work, but it came with strings, a tether back to a company that had dismissed her. She typed a brief reply, "Thank you, but I'm building something of my own." She hit send, the decision final, her freedom absolute. Aura Organics staggered on, but the damage was done. The failed launch and the rival's flop eroded investor trust, and stock prices lingered in the red. David's leadership came under review, his once confident stride replaced by a haggard gait as he faced the board's ultimatums. Chloe, stripped of her title after failing to deliver, took a lesser role at a smaller firm, her storytelling no longer enough to mask her shortcomings. The greenhouse at Aura stood neglected, its orchids wilting without Keisha's touch, a silent monument to their miscalculation. Keisha, meanwhile, thrived. Washington Heritage Labs drew attention from researchers and entrepreneurs, its mission resonating with those who valued authenticity over flash. She hired a small team, trained them in her methods, and began developing new products, not for profit alone, but to preserve the knowledge she'd carried from her family's past. The orchids, glowing under soft grow lights, were more than plants. They were her proof, her power, her legacy reclaimed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Keisha stood in her greenhouse, a tray of seedlings in her hands. The air was warm, scented with earth and possibility. She thought of David's promise, Chloe's theft, the locked file, and the email that had shifted the tide. She hadn't destroyed Aura. She'd simply stepped away, letting their own failures unravel them. Her victory wasn't in their downfall, but in this space, this work, this life she'd built. She set the tray down, her fingers brushing a petal, its silver veins catching the light. The world outside her greenhouse was loud, demanding, but here she was in control. Keisha smiled, a quiet, unshakable peace settling over her. The Genesis line had been hers, and now so was her future. Thank you for joining Keisha Washington's journey in My Boss, gave my promotion to a slacker. I handed in my resignation with a surprise attached. Her story of resilience, strategy, and reclaiming her legacy is one we hope resonates with you. What did you think of Keisha's triumph? How would you have faced such a betrayal? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them with us, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, thank you for being here, and we can't wait to share another story with you soon. What did you think of Keisha's triumph? How would you have faced such a betrayal? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them with us, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, thank you for being here, and we can't wait to share another story with you soon.